The Democrats have a very narrow path to a Senate majority in 2024. While the map is very favorable for the GOP, we saw Democrats exceed expectations across the country in the 2022 midterms. In a best-case scenario, how many seats could the Democrats realistically win in 2024? Let's head to the map. And we'll start on the West Coast in California. California holds a non-partisan primary, meaning the top two candidates, regardless of party affiliation, will head to the general election. And there's a very interesting race breaking out between Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee. Most polls show these three Democrats in the top three positions, but even if a Republican like Eric Early or James Bradley make it to the general election, this seat will be won by a Democrat. In Hawaii, incumbent Democrat Mazie Hirono is running for re-election. Democrats dominate Hawaii, and Hirono received 70% of the vote in 2018. She is going to be re-elected. Washington is another state the Democrats should win comfortably. Incumbent Democrat Maria Cantwell is running for re-election, and her only opponent at the moment is Raul Garcia, who ran for Washington governor in 2020 and received less than 6% of the vote in the nonpartisan primary. Let's head to Montana next. It's one of the most important Senate elections in 2024. Incumbent Democrat Jon Tester is seeking re-election, and truthfully, he's probably the only Democrat that could win this seat. Tester has very strong approval ratings, but he has been hanging on by narrow margins since getting elected in 2006 when he unseated Republican incumbent Conrad Burns. Tester's opponent will almost certainly be businessman Tim Sheehy or House Rep Matt Rosendale. Sheehy has been endorsed by several sitting Republican senators, but voters currently back Rosendale. A new poll conducted by JL Partners shows Rosendale leading Sheehy in the primary by 31 points with just 28% undecided. Rosendale still hasn't officially announced his run, but he has already lost a head-to-head matchup versus Tester in the 2018 Montana Senate race, losing by 3.5%, but 2018 was a very favorable year for the Democratic Party, and in a more neutral environment, perhaps Rosendale would have won. Recent polling from JL Partners shows Tester losing to both Sheehy and Rosendale head-to-head by 4 and 3 points respectively. Nothing Tester couldn't overcome, especially considering that he is the incumbent. And this is where I get to talk about incumbency re-election rates in 2022. 100% of incumbents were re-elected. Senate incumbents have won at a rate of 75% or better since 1982. The incumbency advantage is very hard to overcome. In a best-case scenario, I do see the Democrats holding on to Montana. Nevada will be another very close race. Incumbent Democrat Jackie Rosen is running for re-election. She defeated incumbent Republican Dean Heller by 5% in 2018, and she maintains decent approvals today. There are two strong candidates in the GOP field: Sam Brown, the runner-up in the 2022 Nevada Senate primary, and Jim Marchant, who ran for Nevada Secretary of State in 2022 and lost by about 2%, running slightly behind Adam Laxalt, the GOP's Senate nominee. Speaking of Laxalt, he has ruled out a run in 2024 despite nearly defeating Catherine Cortez Masto in 2022. While Nevada did vote more conservative than the nation in 2022, I still see the Democrats holding onto the seat in a best-case scenario. Rosen is a popular incumbent who should be able to effectively leverage Nevada's universal vote-by-mail system. Before we talk about Arizona, there are some states I want to rule out for the Democrats. The first is Utah. This state will be won by Mitt Romney or some other GOP candidate. I think the best case for the Democrats would be a conservative independent, but that still feels unlikely. Wyoming and North Dakota are both states where the incumbent Republican senator hasn't declared a re-election campaign, but the GOP will hold on to both seats regardless of their nominee. And the GOP will win both the regular and the special election in Nebraska. Alright, let's talk Arizona. It's shaping up to be one of the most interesting and most difficult to predict races. Incumbent Kyrsten Sinema left the Democratic Party in 2022, becoming an independent, and she still hasn't decided whether or not she's going to run for re-election. Democrats wasted no time finding a candidate, with House Rep Ruben Gallego emerging as the clear frontrunner. He has already raised more money than Sinema in several quarters. On the GOP side, Carrie Lake is the clear frontrunner, leading in the polls by about 30%. She will likely announce her campaign this fall. Also set to announce a campaign is Blake Masters, who ran for Senate in 2022 and got thoroughly defeated by Democrat Mark Kelly. Of the officially declared candidates, Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb is polling the strongest, but he likely won't make an impact if Carrie Lake enters the race. And recent polling shows that Sinema's presence in the race actually hurts the Republican candidate. Ruben Gallego's leads shrink in head-to-head matchups. A recent Emerson poll actually shows Gallego tied head-to-head with Mark Lamb. But there's just a lot working against the GOP in Arizona. The demographic shifts have been favorable for the Democrats. Two of the GOP's top three candidates just lost statewide elections in 2022, and there may be a ballot initiative that hopes to overturn the state's existing 15-week ban on abortion. I actually think Gallego is the slight favorite at the moment, and I'd expect Democrats to win Arizona in a best-case scenario. New Mexico is a bit easier to break down. Incumbent Democrat Martin Heinrich will be reelected, probably by double digits. Democrats also have a strong incumbent in Minnesota in Amy Klobuchar. She's going to outrun Joe Biden and hold onto this seat comfortably. Next, let's talk Missouri, and I hope this one isn't controversial. Incumbent Republican Josh Hawley is seeking re-election. He overcame the blue wave in 2018 to defeat incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill. The Democratic Party frontrunner is Lucas Kunce. He ran for Senate in 2022, finishing second in the primary that was won by Trudy Busch Valentine. Kunce has a massive fundraising edge over his Democratic primary opponents, and he should win the party's nomination. Now here's where things might get a little controversial. Kunce's campaign recently conducted and released an internal poll showing him trailing Hawley by just 1%. Obviously, internal polls tend to overestimate the support of the candidate who sponsors them, so Hawley's actual lead is almost certainly better than 1%. If we look back to 2022, Republican Eric Schmidt easily defeated Trudy Busch Valentine by double digits, and he wasn't even an incumbent. And Democrats haven't won Missouri in a presidential election since 1996, though Obama did make it very close in 2008. In a best-case scenario, I really don't see the Democrats flipping Missouri. Next up, we have Texas, another state that might be a little controversial. People have been talking about the Democrats flipping Texas for years, and I think those talks have only increased since Beto O'Rourke nearly defeated Ted Cruz in 2018. But I'm not sure 2018 translates very well to 2024. It was a midterm in an environment very favorable for the Democratic Party. Beto O'Rourke was lightning in a bottle, a media darling who raised tons of money, especially from small donors. In 2024, the Democrats will likely nominate Colin Allred, a House rep from Texas's 32nd congressional district, who once played football for the Tennessee Titans. Allred has raised a considerable amount of money compared to the rest of the Democratic field, though it's nothing compared to how much Ted Cruz has in his war chest. And while Ted Cruz is a rather unlikable person in my opinion, and while he does have one of the worst approval ratings according to data from Morning Consult, he still holds a net +5 approval rating. He's an incumbent with good enough approvals and a ton of money in a state Republicans have historically done very well in. Additionally, current polling shows Cruz leading Allred by an average of 6 points, and for those reasons, I don't see Texas flipping even in a blue wave year, especially if the GOP nominates someone other than Donald Trump. Mississippi, Tennessee, and Indiana are all states I'd expect the GOP to hold pretty comfortably in 2024. Now, before we talk about these Rust Belt states, I want to touch on the East Coast states where Democrats should win pretty easily. That includes New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. These are all states the Democrats would win in a best-case scenario. In Vermont and Maine, you have independents who caucus with the Democrats in Bernie Sanders and Angus King. Sanders hasn't officially declared his campaign, but I expect him to do so, and he and King would win pretty comfortably in a best-case scenario for Democrats. Virginia is another state the Democrats should win. Incumbent Tim Kaine is quite popular, and polls even show him ahead of Glenn Youngkin, who would be the GOP's best bet to flip the state. However, it's unlikely that Glenn Youngkin will even run for Senate. This brings the Democrats to 46 Senate seats, with the GOP at 48 Senate seats. Next, let's head to Pennsylvania, which has been razor close in recent presidential elections. However, I do think Bob Casey holds on to his seat. Casey is an incumbent Democrat who holds a net +12 approval rating in Pennsylvania. Casey is likely to face David McCormick, the runner-up in the 2022 Pennsylvania GOP primary. While McCormick hasn't officially declared his candidacy, he has expressed interest and already has the endorsement of Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. I think regardless of who the GOP nominates, Pennsylvania will be tough for their candidate. 2022 was a disaster for the Pennsylvania GOP as Doug Mastriano and Dr. Oz really underperformed. I'm also not too concerned about Joe Biden potentially weighing down Casey, as Casey's approval rating among Pennsylvania voters is much better than Joe Biden's. We don't have any really recent polls, but one conducted in May shows Casey leading McCormick by 12 points head-to-head. On average, Casey leads McCormick by 8 points. Pennsylvania is a state I'd expect the Democrats to win in a best-case scenario, and who knows, maybe Casey pulls Biden along to victory. On the flip side, I don't think Democrats have much of a chance in Florida. Incumbent Senator Rick Scott isn't the strongest candidate, but the GOP has really taken over Florida, as evidenced by the massive victories of Marco Rubio and Ron DeSantis in 2022. And despite losing the general election in 2020, Trump actually performed better in Florida than he did in 2016. Right now, there isn't a clear frontrunner on the Democratic side, but one of the top contenders, Phil Ayer, did conduct an internal poll showing him trailing Scott by 4%. I think the best case scenario for the Democrats here is really a defeat of less than 5%. Next, let's head to West Virginia, a state I believe the GOP is in a strong position to win. However, there is a path to victory for the Democrats. Step 1, get Joe Manchin to run for re-election. Manchin still hasn't officially declared his candidacy, and he may not even run again, but if Manchin doesn't run, the Democrats will lose West Virginia, period. But even if Manchin runs, it's still an uphill battle. While Manchin is an incumbent, he also has a net minus 16 approval rating among West Virginians. That's second worst among all senators. The only senator who is less popular is Mitch McConnell. Step 2 for a Democratic victory is to hope the GOP nominates someone other than Jim Justice. Jim Justice is the current West Virginia governor, and he's the frontrunner in the GOP primary. His top opponent is Alex Mooney, a House rep from West Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Justice has a big lead in the primary over Mooney, and Justice's polling numbers head-to-head against Joe Manchin are much better than Mooney's. While I do think the GOP should be considered the favorites to win here, I think the Democrats have a path, albeit narrow, to victory. You can check out my full Senate prediction to see why I think West Virginia actually leans towards the GOP in this current environment. But we're not talking about the current environment in this video, we're talking about a best case scenario, and the best case scenario for the Democrats in the Rust Belt states of Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin would allow them to maintain their Senate majority. Let's start with Wisconsin. Incumbent Democrat Tammy Baldwin is running for re-election, and she still doesn't have an opponent. Republican House reps Mike Gallagher, Brian Steele, and Tom Tiffany have all declined to run, and any of them would have made a solid general election candidate. The candidates who have publicly expressed interest in running or who have declared their candidacies don't appear to me to be good enough candidates to unseat a strong incumbent in a state where Democrats have performed very well electorally in recent election cycles. I really believe there's a reason why the top candidates on the GOP side have declined to run, and that's why I think the Democrats hold on to Wisconsin in a best case scenario. Maybe we'll get some more clarity on this race once the GOP finds their candidate. Democrats also have a strong candidate in Michigan. Incumbent Debbie Stabenow won't seek re-election, but the Democrats have coalesced around House Rep Alyssa Slotkin as their candidate. Slotkin has a very comfortable lead in the Democratic primary. Meanwhile, the GOP primary is wide open. Several House reps have expressed interest, including Peter Meijer, Bill Hizwenga, and Mike Rogers. A primary poll conducted by Emerson shows there's no clear frontrunner. But there's something big working against the GOP in Michigan. The state party is broke, and I think it's going to be very challenging for them to run a competitive statewide campaign in 2024. I think the Democrats hold Michigan in a best-case scenario, with Alyssa Slotkin winning by a margin of more than 5%. And that brings us to Ohio. Before we break it down, if you're enjoying this video so far, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out tremendously. Democrats have a very strong incumbent candidate in Sherrod Brown. He has a net plus 14 approval rating in Ohio. That's 35 points better than Joe Biden, according to data from Morning Consult. Working against Brown is the fact that Ohio has taken a hard right turn in recent elections, electing Trump by 8 points in 2020 and electing J.D. Vance to the Senate by more than 6% in 2022. The GOP has two good candidates in State Senator Matt Dolan and Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Dolan finished third in the 2022 GOP Senate primary, trailing Vance by 10%. The most recent GOP primary poll shows LaRose leading Dolan by 14%, but 43% of voters are still undecided. And while I think either LaRose or Dolan could win, I believe Sherrod Brown would hold on to this seat in a best-case scenario for the Democratic Party. Head-to-head polling found Sherrod Brown narrowly leading both candidates, with one Suffolk poll showing LaRose tied with Brown. However, LaRose was the face of the Issue 1 campaign in Ohio, which would have made it more difficult to change the state's constitution. Issue 1 was clobbered at the polls, an embarrassing defeat for LaRose. I think Brown's popularity and incumbency advantage can be enough for him to hold onto the seat even as Ohio becomes more favorable for the GOP. And that brings the Democrats to 51 Senate seats. As you can see, a best-case scenario for the Democrats in 2024 is barely holding on to the Senate majority, which is something I'm sure they'd still be happy with. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section down below, then check out my next video to see how many seats the GOP could win in a best-case scenario.